is now how do the education players can really convey the message. The unions have been really at the forefront, creating tools, making sure that you have health and safety, the emotional also benefit, but also the importance of social dialogue. That is why we're going to hand it over to Duncan Smith, who is going to talk about this. He's also the in charge of education and communities. So Duncan, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you, colleagues from education unions, network members, and representatives of mutual benefit societies from around the world. I'm Duncan Smith. I'm the Senior Coordinator for Governance and Administrative Services at Education International. I'm also a board member of the Education and Solidarity Network, and I was directly involved in the discussions that led to its creation 11 years ago. In this short presentation, I'll briefly introduce my organization. Then I will look at universal health coverage from the perspective of one of our new members. And I will finish by highlighting some of our work on COVID-19. It's actually quite an undertaking in just 10 minutes, but let's get going. Education International is the global federation that brings together 387 member organizations in 179 countries and territories, together representing some 32.5 million teachers and education support personnel. We salute the organization of International Universal Health Coverage Day on 12 December as an annual awareness raising effort to urge governments to implement Sustainable Development Goal 3 on ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all at all ages. While Education International, while EI's brief focuses more on the implementation of SDG 4, on ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all, we note that less than half of the global population is covered by essential health services. And I believe we all know about the strong correlation between countries that are struggling to provide that quality education to their population and those that are likewise failing to adequately ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all by 2030. And I think it's fair to say that this correlation, together with a strong set of common values in which solidarity is central, is what brings together education unions and mutual benefit societies in this network. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. Earlier this week, EI welcomed several new affiliates, among which the National Teachers Union of South Sudan, the NTUSS. Now, South Sudan is a fairly new country, having gained its independence in 2011 only. It's a hard place, and it has just come out of a 6-year civil war. Next slide. In its inaugural report on implementation of the SDGs in September 2017, the country noted that it, quote, was starting this process from a very low base in a context of an active conflict and humanitarian emergency. On SDG 3, as you can see on the slides, the report speaks of poor health indicators, lack and limited functionality of health facilities, lack of essential medicines and electricity, shortage of human health resources, and so on. On SDG 4, the same report notes that the nationwide literacy rate is one of the lowest in the world, that 25% of all primary schools were closed, that many others had been subjected to attacks by militias and even the military, and as many as 76% of all school-age girls were not going to school. All in all, you will agree, it is a grim picture. South Sudan has a very long way to go to achieve health coverage for all. Where do they begin? Where do we begin to help them? Next slide, please. Well, the same report notes that, quote, the education sector and the role of schools, teachers, and students is often credited with bringing together members of diverse communities and supporting civic values during times of crisis, end quote. And very soon, EI will start helping the National Teachers Union of South Sudan on the long road to better living and working conditions for their members, for the whole education community, and ultimately the entire population. How do we do that? We will help them understand what the right to quality education and the right to health actually mean, what the texts say, what their government should do. We will mobilize the donor community to build up the capacity of the NTUSS so that they can advocate for their rights and those of the entire community. At international level, we will continue to partner with the International Trade Union Confederation to demand a new social contract with adequate social protection floors in all countries. Now, it is impossible, as the year 2020 comes to a close, not to reflect on the catastrophic damage wrought by the COVID-19 pandemic in all countries of the world. Already we know that it's going to set us back in the implementation of SDG 3 and SDG 4 to an extent we thought was impossible. And I want to spend some time to highlight the impact of COVID-19 in the education sector and to show you what Education International has been doing in response to the pandemic. Next slide, please. As you know, almost 2 billion children and students were forced out of school when the pandemic hit in mid-March. The disruption to education has been and remains severe. About 500 million children have been cut off from all education for months. They live mostly in rural areas and or poor households where they have little or no access to online education. This is not just in developing countries. In some areas of the UK, in England, for example, as many as 50% of secondary school students have been absent from school for weeks now. Teachers' workload has increased significantly as a result of the pandemic. In countries where schools reopened, teachers often have to run face-to-face and online education in parallel, in addition to learning how to master new technology and finding new ways to deliver the curriculum. And going back to school has not been without risk for teachers, who are frontline workers, with some belonging to high-risk groups in relation to the coronavirus. In Portugal, as many as 38,000 teachers in the high-risk group continue to go to school in the absence of a national framework, allowing them to work from home. While there's no global evidence available yet on the impact of the pandemic on teacher stress and well-being, the reports EI is getting from its member unions point to a dramatic increase. In September, one of our Polish members reported that up to 10,000 teachers had left a profession in a country where the average age of teachers is fairly high, over 50 years of age, and where it is believed that they quit out of fear that their lives might be in danger if they remained in the classroom. But perhaps one of the only positive consequences of this crisis has been that education unions in countries like the UK, Australia, and the Nordic countries have grown in membership. In those countries, school representatives have been able to blow the whistle when the conditions were not made for a safe reopening. Next slide, please. Education International, as an umbrella organization for national teachers unions, has been working around the clock since mid-March. Before April had even begun, we published a set of guiding principles for education in times of the pandemic, later used by UNESCO and several national governments. We surveyed our affiliates on the extent to which they were engaged in dialogue with governments at national level. Then, at the end of April, we published guidance on the reopening of schools, spelling out the conditions to be met for children to return to school safely. In the meantime, we had also established a special fund where we collected almost €250,000 from our richer member organizations to help finance COVID-related projects by our members in some 20 developing countries. Those projects concern awareness raising about COVID-19 in remote areas, trade union training about online teaching and learning materials, organizing union workshops about hygiene and safety measures, etc., etc. Next slide, please. That's the last one. And we published our COVID-19 guides called Forward to School, in which we consolidated our guidance and developed resources for national unions to respond to the pandemic. On the slide here, you can see a sample of the resources we have developed, often in multiple languages. You can find them on our website and also on our ISU page, together with all the other publications and research studies we've put out over the years. And we will have another briefing note for all members coming up next Thursday. The theme of the last World Congress in Bangkok in July 2019 was educators and their unions take the lead. So I'll conclude here by saying, in line with the theme of this webinar, that the role of education communities in working towards universal health coverage and inclusive and equitable quality education for all is indeed by mobilizing and taking the lead in South Sudan and elsewhere to demand a better future for all children and students in a COVID-19 free world. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you for this overall view. It's great to see what is happening in the world.